Okay, so today I want to talk a little bit about the best ear training and audiation courses. And of course, I'm going to talk about mine, but I'm going to talk about some others too. So, I know a lot of you are probably struggling with ear training and audiation. You probably tried apps, YouTube lessons, maybe even some online courses, but nothing's really stuck. You'll probably develop a certain amount of skill, and then things get difficult from there. Like often with these ear training programs, you'll reach a point where you kind of plateau and you can't get to the next level. There's going to be a drill that's too difficult or something that just completely confuses you, or you'll find that the course has escalated in difficulty too quickly. So, look, I understand what it's like to feel like your ears are stubborn. I've been there myself. I had a really strong ability to audiate, which I had to work at really hard when I first started in college. But the issue that came after that was once I learned to audiate, all of a sudden now I didn't have the ear to extract what I was hearing. And so, there's always something else you have to overcome. But my point in telling you this is, I've been there and I want to share some of the courses that I've built that are designed specifically for stubborn ears like yours. And I also want to say something else. It doesn't matter if you're 20 years old, if you're a kid, if you're an adult, if you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s. I have found that anybody with the ability to still hear can develop a good ear. Now, a lot of times we think, well, my hearing is bad. I'm too old. My hearing isn't what it used to be. Things like this. But it's not really about how good your hearing is. As long as you can still hear, then you can be trained to hear intervals, chords, and you can train to do it internally. And that's what really matters because the internal ear doesn't it doesn't matter how well you can hear. The internal ear can get stronger, deeper, more intense the more that you do it. So I just want to point that out that especially if you're older, I think ear training is critical, especially if you're like a Beethoven who started to lose his hearing and realized, hey, you know what, I need to do something about this. You can develop the ability to hear things internally and enjoy music. I mean, imagine that. Imagine if you were Beethoven and you started to lose your hearing, but you could still hear your symphonies in your mind. You wouldn't necessarily be able to enjoy from a concert setting. You might sense vibrations, especially from vocalists, and you might be able to tell based on the vibrations, because he was so adept at that, whether or not a singer was in tune, right? But you still have that internal ability. And that's something that you want to start developing as soon as possible at whatever stage you're currently at. So I'm going to mention a few popular options out there so you know it's available. But honestly, after years of teaching, coaching, personal trial and error, my university experience, I truly believe that my courses offer something different and I think they're more effective. So we're going to dive into this. I want to first start by talking about why most ear training and audiation courses miss the mark. So let me start by telling you what a lot of ear training courses don't really do for stubborn ears. They usually do a few things. They throw you into drills without clear order or strategy. This is so important. It's the thing that I put so much time into when working at university because I wanted to come in every day and I wanted to incrementally increase the difficulty. But the problem with that is you'd have students that would come Monday, miss Tuesday, come Wednesday, miss the entire week sometimes. And they'd be like, well, I need to do some makeup work. And you're like, well, you've missed an entire week of sequential exercises. So now when you come in next week, you're going to be behind. It's not that the drills we were doing, because I was so incremental, were very difficult, but they missed some foundational training. And so there needs to be a clear order and there needs to be a strategy. So if you're thinking about an ear training program or an audiation program, I would contact the developer and I would say, what is your order? what is your strategy? What is the premise behind your course other than simple exposure? Because exposure by itself is not going to work. Another thing that is often missed is there's too much of a focus on passive listening apps. So passive listening is very important. Passive listening is kind of like if I do this. Oh, I gotta turn on my original sound here. Otherwise, you won't be able to hear me. If I can find it. It's always hard to find these things. They keep moving them. Let's see. Audio. There we go. All right. So passive listening drill would be something like this. My mirror exercise starts out active because you have to learn to sing it. C, G, C, G, C, G, C, G, C, G, C, or perfect fifth, perfect fifth, perfect fifth, perfect fifth. It's active at first when you're learning it, but once you learn it, you can do it without thinking. That's passive. My course is on here, 10 hours of ear training for studying, sleep, all that fun stuff. That's passive because you are just sitting there listening to the intervals. But with that drill, and this is a trick, you can make it active. So what you'll hear is something like this. So when you hear the interval harmonically, you try and break it apart, bottom to top. Now you're making the passive drill active. And then when it goes from bottom to top, sometimes it'll go and start with the bottom note first. Other times it'll start with the top note. You'll hear the top note first. And you can make it active by quickly saying, that's the top note. That's the bottom note, the first one that you hear. So passive drills are important. But if there is too much emphasis on passive drills, like these things that say, listen to the perfect fifth for 40 hours, you don't know it. That's not true. If you listen to the fifth for 40 hours, you'll have wasted 40 hours. Because what will happen is you will have never compared it to anything else. You won't have combined it with other drills like, can you isolate the bottom and the top note? Can you hear a perfect fifth in this cluster? Is there more than one perfect fifth? How many perfect fifths are there? There's all these different ways where we can approach the perfect fifth from multiple different angles. And that's what we have to do. And you don't want to just start randomly by just trying to hear the perfect fifth in different ways. You need to have sort of a sequence. You need to have a methodology for it. So when there aren't enough active exercises, the passive exercises don't work. It's like, I don't know, trying to learn to walk by watching somebody else walk. You might get the gist of it and it might help you a little bit, but until you start walking, you're not going to develop the muscles, you're not going to develop the strength, you're not going to be able to move properly. Another thing that just about every course misses, and now I've noticed that since I started doing this, more courses are starting to include this, but people ignore audiation. This is a skill of hearing music in your head before you play it, before you hear it in the outside world. This is huge for musical understanding. If you are not audiating what you're hearing, then you're not internalizing it. Everything's external. Music is not just an external art. Believe it or not, what we hear in our heads and how it resonates with what we hear in the outside is just as important. So we want to make sure that we're not ignoring audiation and that whatever course you're using is using some aspect of audiation. And there's different levels. Like in my Flawless course, it's a little bit of audiation, but it's just enough to help you really get into the sounds of whatever intervals we're working on. My Audiation Masterclass series is much more intensive. It teaches actual audiation techniques. It teaches like what you can do. It's an intense course, and that's why I also created Audiation Essentials. So Audiation Essentials is me telling you, this is a methodology. These are some of the exercises you can do if you want to do it on your own. And you can kind of go through that and get the principles of audiation without having to take the whole master class. And then now I have the Composing Hour Inner Ear Training. This is a really effective course so far. The students are really liking it. I'm getting very positive feedback. The students are starting to hear actual notes. You know, like one student said, I'm hearing a C and an E flat, which is great. Not the goal of the course, but it's great. And I do mention how I think that is an aspect of this that could be developed. I'm not trying to teach perfect pitch, but what happens when you are focusing in on a certain note, like a C, and when you approach it from multiple different angles, like I have you do in the course, with kind of this relaxed bird song in the background, all these little things that I do to try and help you focus, what ends up happening is you do start to hear the difference between C and E flat, which are two of the notes we start with, for a very particular reason, which you may be thinking, well, why don't you start with the perfect fifth? Because everything else you say, if you've been following me, like you start with the perfect fifth. I'm doing that for a reason. Those notes are closer together. I explain in the course why we're using a different interval, but not until about lesson 4. Anyway, so audiation's important. And honestly, what I have been going towards is I've been creating this flawless course. I started with a video version because I wanted to offer a lot of explanation, and the video version explains so much about ear training. It is a great course if you're one of those people that doesn't just want exercises, wants to understand the why. That's the video course. And then there's the audio version of the course. The audio version is very streamlined, and we get right into the exercises because it's for people that just don't really care about the teaching. You're not going to become a teacher yourself. You don't need to know why you're doing what you're doing. You don't want a lot of techniques. You just want the exercises. So what I've done is I've made the audio version no longer than 20 minutes throughout the entire course. So each session is just 20 minutes long or less. And that allows you to combine it with the Inner Ear Training course, the Composing Hour Inner Ear Training course. And when you put those together, you get an hour a day. And the reason they're separate is because you're going to do ear training most likely at a different pace than audiation. And so we have to separate them. If I combined ear training and audiation, then what would happen is you'd have people taking the audiation course, the combined 1 hour ear training audiation course, and they would be like, well, this ear training is really easy. I can go faster with the ear training, but the audiation's hard. And so it wouldn't match up. I want you to be able to go at your own pace in each component, because some people will go the other way around. Some people will say, the audiation's easy. I got this. It's the ear training I need more time on, and you're going too fast on the ear training. So by breaking them up, I have this real nice program where ear training for 20 minutes, audiation for 40, and the audiation teaches everything. I mean, it teaches, the first year is really just audiation, developing that really strong ability internally. The second year expands upon audiation by teaching you counterpoint. No exercises you have to write out. You're doing it all in your head. And I'm prepping you in the first year to be able to do that. So we take a year to develop this ability to really see a staff in our mind and work with our memories and improve our memories as much as we can. And then the third year, we get into form and analysis, believe it or not. So this is all going to be just audiation based. Point being, audiation, very important. I kind of ranted a little bit there, but that's going to happen in a live stream. So another thing that they typically miss is they don't help you develop the mindset and confidence to actually sing and identify sounds. So these courses, I've said this before, but every time you hear a perfect fifth, it's going to be it won't be with different articulations like and you really need someone there. AI maybe eventually will be able to do this fairly effectively, but AI doesn't have human ears, and you need somebody who's sitting there who has a lot of experience and is able to guide you in a way that makes sense. And somebody who can say, okay, it's going a little bit too fast now we need to slow it down a bit. Now we need to speed it up. So you need to develop this confidence to sing and identify sounds, but you need to be able to do it in a way that is more or less easy. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be pretty easy. I mean, I've seen students, they get frustrated, overwhelmed, and eventually they give up because the course that they're taking, it wasn't designed for real human brains. It was just drills and theory. So you do need more than that, I think. So talking a little bit about my flawless ear training course that, you can start here on YouTube. This was really built from the ground up for people with stubborn ears. I originally designed it for my university students. What you're going to see is Unit 1 is a unit that eventually I would like to go back and record again, because Unit 1 was pretty much all live sessions. So what that means is sometimes the audio quality won't be perfect. Sometimes there's distortion. I don't really care about that because that's actually a good thing, but I know that it's a barrier for some people. So I'm going to have to find other ways, which I've figured out how to do, but I'm going to find other ways to create distractions to force you to listen into notes. But if you hear like a real staticky perfect fifth in that course, it's because it's live. The recording was meant really just for my university students to get extra practice, and there were certain issues with actually recording that live. But the distortion's good, and I stand by this, because when you have a little bit of distortion, you have to filter out that distortion. It forces you to pay more attention, it forces you to focus, and it makes you just a little bit frustrated. Now, here's the thing about frustration. Frustration's good, but not if it's because of the instruction. So I want you to tell me, if you're taking the Flawless course and you come across a lesson and you're like, it's not the drill that's hard. If you understand how to do the drill, but the drill is just hard for you, that's fine. I don't care about that. That is designed that way. But if you're unclear on the instructions for the drill, so if you complete it once and then the second time you can't complete it and understand how to actually do the drill, that's a problem. That's something that needs to be touched up, or that's something that I can explain further to you. And the reason frustration is good is because when you're frustrated, it activates, I talk about this a lot, this reticular activating system, where a little bit of frustration helps increase learning and retention. And I've talked about that in another video, so I'm not going to go into detail now. But Unit 1, you're going to experience a little bit of that. And for the most part, I'm also going through and editing those lectures to try and eliminate some of that as best I can. But here's what makes that course a little bit different. It teaches the intervals in the right order. So we start with the perfect intervals, then we move on to thirds, then six. So you're building this strong foundation. Those sets of intervals alone can help you hear the vast majority of music that is out there. Now, if you're listening to Stockhausen or some modern music, some John Cage or Xenakis, then obviously we go way beyond tonal music in those instances. But the vast majority of music that most people listen to are going to be these tonal intervals. The fifths, the perfect intervals, the thirds, and the sixths. There will also be a lot of sevenths in there, which is the next grouping we work with, and then we start to deal with the seconds and tritones. But we save those for the end because we want to have a strong foundation in the consonant intervals first, and then gradually move into more dissonance. Another thing that makes it a little bit different is you get practical step-by-step exercises that include singing, listening, and it's all kind of here on the keyboard so that you can hear it with a semi-consistent sound. Now I go back and forth between using an acoustic and an electric piano because each one has different attributes that I'm trying to address depending on the lesson. The acoustic is going to give you a more full-bodied sound. You're going to have more overtones. The electric piano is going to cut some of that out, and it'll help you to hear more compressed music, which is most of the music we hear in a lot of recordings. So it's really designed to rewire your brain using spaced repetition and call and response drills. These are, scientifically proven to build those neural pathways. I did another video about this recently where I was talking about neural pathways. It's something that I've been interested in ever since college. I started out as a biology major, and I was very interested in neuroscience. My brother actually did get a degree in psychology, and we used to have these talks in the car where he talked to me about, we tried to eat a hamburger, and he's telling me the chemical processes that are making me want to eat that hamburger. And it's like, okay, can I just eat this? But it was very useful because I actually learned a lot from his education, because he, whether I liked it or not, I think it was a way of learning in some ways. He would just indoctrinate me with whatever he was learning at the time. And so, I've tried to build that into these courses as much as possible. And even when I first got out of my master's program, I worked for a school called Wildcat School in Tucson, Arizona. And one of the things about that was all of our teaching had to be research-based. So our lesson plans had to cite the research study we were using. And that kind of set me on the stage. And then later, of course, in the university, I continued that. Made sense, right? But what happened after a certain amount of time is these research studies started to become more practical. So I was using them in real time, and I was saying, this works, this doesn't really work, I can make it better this way. And so that's kind of how all my courses have started to come together. One thing I will say, it's something that I'm realizing, when I first left the university, when my job was discontinued, it's a nice way of putting it, but when my job was discontinued, what happened was I had always had this plan B. I wanted to create all the courses that I've been teaching. I just wanted to teach them and put them in kind of like little packages. So you get counterpoint, form, 20th century techniques, Schenkerian analysis, everything that I taught over the 8 years. And I was just going to go ahead and do like PowerPoint lectures. And so if you go to my website and you see counterpoint and form, those two courses are very intellectual. They're very academic. They're very lecture heavy. And they're me lecturing. And they're getting close to being finished. But they're massive courses because I've included a lot of extra information that is designed for composers to understand how to write music through them, and for audiences to be able to get deeper into it. But they're really kind of high level. And so they can be a little hard to get through. So what I'm doing now is I realize there is a need for that, but it's kind of a smaller need. One of my counterpoint courses is actually even being used for credit at one university for a student who needs a graduate level course. He's taking my counterpoint course right now to get credit for his university. So those courses are serving that purpose. But I realize that's not really like the mass market. And so one of the things that really interests me is, how can you take these really complex concepts and train people who have little to no knowledge of music from the beginning? And that's what my Composing Hour course is doing. And also to some extent, that's what Staff Speaks does. Staff Speaks teaches people from the very beginning, these are the names of the notes on the staff in the most common staff systems that are used, like treble, bass, and the C clefs. So you'll become proficient in 90 days, ideally, in just reading the notes on the staff. Something that was a huge barrier for certain students in the university. And I realized if it's a problem for university students, it's probably a problem for everybody. Even other professors I talk to sometimes, they're not all that familiar with the clef outside the one they use every day. And that surprises me, and I think it's an issue. So the Staff Speaks is there to kind of solve that problem. And it's 10 minutes a day. You go and complete the exercises, forget about it. Go on the next day and just keep going through. By the end of it, the goal is not to have an ear, although it does do some ear training stuff. It introduces you to foundational ear training. The real goal is to teach you to understand how to read music on the staff system in different class. So that fulfills that need. But the Audiation course, what it's doing is, like I said, I had these complex, like high-level counterpoint informant analysis courses. They're really dense. I think they would require quite a bit of studying to understand. But what I want to do with the Audiation course is teach people from the beginning, without having to open a book, the concepts. Because musicians don't need to know, how a minuet trio form works in Haydn's Sonata in G. How he goes from one chord to the next. What they need to understand is that it is a tripartite structure. They need to understand essentially how it's constructed, the types of phrases that are used, and things like this. And I think they need it in a way where it's easy. So 40 minutes, a couple times a week, you listen to this audio, and it's immersion. It's like Pimsleur. I mean, that's really my motivation, where I'm going to teach you all these concepts by ear. So the thing about Pimsleur, I didn't get that far with it, but I was really struck by how those courses worked early on. And whether or not this is how they work, this is how I remember it, which was that it was all audio, and they would teach you the sound of things without actually being able to read it, which was weird for me because I studied German in college, and we very much went with the visual first, and we learned a very academic approach to learning language. But Pimsleur said, essentially, I'm going to teach you through repetition and spaced repetition. And that stuck with me. And so that's what I'm doing with the Audiation course, the Composing Our Inner Ear Training course, is I'm doing these spaced intervals where we're building a foundation for audiation, which will then set us up to be able to learn all these other concepts in a very intuitive way, in a practical way. So you will hear what a binary form sounds like without actually seeing it. You will hear what a period, a type of phrase, sounds like in comparison to a sentence without actually seeing it. You'll begin to hear chord progressions and all these other aspects of it. So, I mean, that's really what makes my courses different, is it's audiation based. So really, the Flawless Ear Training course is designed to rewire your brain, and all my courses are designed to take you from the ground up and develop this real strong ability to actually just hear and play music. And a crazy thing happens. I can't explain it. So I'm not a pianist, but I can now improvise little things on the piano. And I know the sounds, the chords, I know exactly where to go. And it's because of actually creating some of these trainings. And what will happen is you will start to, basically we can think of it this way. Anything you put into your brain, musical experiences, anything that you experience in life, it kind of gets thrown into your brain, your body, I don't know, however it works. And then it goes through this filter of your own experiences, everything that you have experienced. And eventually it saturates you with something. And then it just comes back out. Like you'll notice when you start to take these courses, when you're playing, you're just more aware of the person next to you. When you're listening to a recording, you're hearing something you never heard before. When you're writing music, it somehow seems a little more fluid. It's because what we're doing is we're putting these foundational structures into your mind, and then you are spitting them back out in your own original way. And I think it's the only way, honestly, to learn, in my opinion. So, this course is also filled with kind of like mindset coaching. This is designed to help keep you motivated and overcome these mental blocks. The biggest mental blocks are, I don't have a good ear, I'm frustrated, I hate this drill, I've been on this drill for 2 weeks. Well, first of all, in the Flawless course, you don't do that anymore. That's how I started. But it was always the goal. The goal was actually for you to just do one a day. No matter how you did, that's why it was Flawless. You couldn't really make a mistake. You go in, you listen, you try your best, then you go on to lesson 2. You go in, you listen, you try your best, then you go on to lesson 3. But I think for the best results, and at least until the course is complete, it's better to spend 3 days on a lesson unless you get 100%. If you get 100%, everything's easy. Go on to the next lesson. If you don't, spend 3 days and move on. Enjoy that little bit of frustration, because that little bit of frustration is a good thing. And there's nothing to worry about here. You just come in, you press play, you do the exercises, and you say, okay, I'm done. I did the best I could today. I'm going to try again tomorrow on either the same lesson for 3 days in a row, or you go on to the next lesson. However it works out for you. And the reason it works this way is because these lessons are not meant to be mastered. You're not meant to memorize the dictations. They're long enough that most of us, and they're abstract enough that most of us can't memorize them. But let's say you start out and you only get the first measure. When I say audiate, you audiate that first measure and you can't remember anything else. And a couple days later, a new dictation comes along. You've had a few different dictations now, so you're getting exposed to different things every day. A few days later, you're like, hey, I can hear 2 measures. Oh, I got 2 measures down. And then a month later, month and a half later, oh, I can hear 3 measures. And then 6 months later, you know what? I can hear 8 measures, no problem. That's how it works. It's not that you're meant to get perfection. You're not. These courses are, you just go through them, trust the process, and don't just trust the process. If after a month you're not noticing a change, some subtle change, it could be more substantial, but if you're not noticing a subtle change where when you're listening to music or playing music or hearing music, if there isn't something more informed about what you're hearing, then maybe it's time to think, okay, maybe my approach doesn't work for you. But you want to take that approach with any course you do. After a month of training fairly consistently, you should see results. If you're not, it's probably not going to work for you, and you may need a different approach. So that's all I'll say about that. So, this audiation thing, how my audiation course helps you, you've probably heard this term thrown around. I've been talking about it a lot today, but remember, it's just this ability to hear music in your head. I'm surprised how many people will comment or send me emails and say, what is audiation? You made up this term. And I didn't. Dr. Edwin Gordon did in the 80s. Okay. He has the Gordon Institute for Audiation. I mean, there's this whole program for it. But see, his program is to teach kids music. And my program's a little different. My program is using the concept of audiation because it's a nice term that exists now, and it encapsulates a lot of information. It's to use audiation to hear music, write music, perform better, improvise better. So I'm using it differently. In a way, he's using it for school. I'm using it for professional musicians and for those who just want to get deeper into music. So, it's this ability to imagine notes, intervals, and rhythms without actually playing them. You're just hearing them. It's crucial because musicians, they don't just react to sound. They anticipate. They create it. They make it complex, and you create it mentally first. So the problem here, and why I'm addressing this again, is because most ear training programs, they skip this entirely. There is no talk of audiation. And I just don't know why that is, but it's prevalent. We don't audiate what we're hearing. We should always try and audiate. If you can audiate a perfect fifth, and there's a little bit of uncertainty that comes with that sometimes, you're like, well, I can't verify it. Because if I go like this, and then I try and hear that in my head, I hear something, but how do you verify it? You don't at first. You listen, you do your best to recreate it, you sing it, you hear it and identify it, you approach it from all these different layers, and what happens is by doing everything in the lesson, all these different ways of hearing the perfect fifth, it builds up all the other ways you can hear the perfect fifth, including the audiation. And eventually you do know that you're hearing a fifth in your head, but it just takes a little time. So my Audiation courses and Flawless, to some extent, they teach you how to build this skill. We start simple and we grow more complex, and we integrate singing, rhythm, and melody. Although rhythm is by far the one thing that I don't incorporate too much. And part of the reason for that is because rhythm is so complex. If I were to make a course that also dealt with rhythm, I mean, it would be a much more expansive course. And so with rhythm, I almost think it's better to get a book of rhythms, and ones that are graded, like the Ann Hall textbook. There's a book of rhythms that she's created, and they go from simple to really complex. Go through that, look for other rhythm books. Those are kind of a lifelong thing where you're constantly trying to expand your ability to actually play rhythms. Rhythms are very physical. Pitch is very mental. So there's a difference there. And so that's why I don't really incorporate rhythm, except for basic rhythms for dictations, into the actual course. So the Audiation course, it kind of helps you transition from hearing sounds to truly understanding and internalizing them. That's one point I'd make. And then, this is just going to be a game changer for improvisation, sight singing, and composition. Okay, so what about other popular options? So I've used them, and they've all helped to some degree. So we're going to be real here for a minute. There are some great ear training resources out there. For example, apps like Tenuto. Tenuto is based on musictheory.net, and they have an ear training component if it works for you. I know some users have, when we try to use it in my college courses, some students it worked great, others they couldn't get the app to work, but that was a year ago, so maybe it's a little better now, and if it works for you, it works for you. There's also something called Perfect Ear. They're great for drills, but they are dry and a little bit impersonal. So they're great for drilling the way they drill. And if you wanted something while just kind of like sitting in a parking lot or something like that, then it would be good to have something like that to keep testing your ear. But again, you don't want to do too much ear training. And if you are going to use those along with the Flawless course, stick to the intervals we're working on and the chords we're working on in the Flawless course. That would add one more dimension, and it wouldn't be a bad thing. Platforms like Tone Gym. I subscribed to this for a while. I liked it. It was great. It's kind of a gamified learning, but it sometimes lacks the explanations and mindset work. And if that works for you, it doesn't hurt to use a program like Tone Gym. I don't think it's going to work as deeply because it doesn't do a lot of the exercises that I do in my courses. And actually, I don't really know of any course that does do everything I do, but I thought it was an effective program. It was a fun program. I just thought it was a little bit expensive. And for me personally, like when I started studying meditation, I've been interested in it since college. And I finally found something where, I was taught how to meditate and I didn't need an app. I can just close my eyes and meditate now. And that's what I always wanted. I want something that I don't need to keep paying someone for to be able to do. I want concepts and techniques so I can kind of do it on my own. So Tone Gym, you always have to log into a website. I don't know if they have an app, but it can be kind of inconvenient. That's my only downside to it. And I don't know, because I haven't used it that much, how well it will actually develop your ears long term. I don't know how deep it goes and how effective the training actually is. Earmaster or functional ear training, those are solid, but again, they don't focus on audiation or the mindset either. And mindset's important. I remember I had a student had anxiety, like real anxiety, and a student said, well, when I'm by myself or when my frame of mind is correct, I can hear things and I can hear them fine. But you get me into a classroom setting or privately, all of a sudden I can't hear anything. And I believe that because I know it to be true. And so you need to have something that helps you overcome that just a little bit. And I mean, when it's clinical, that's kind of a different situation. There's a difference between anxiety and nerves, as I'm sure we're all aware. But there are ways you can get over the nerves. And one of the ways you get over nerves is by just becoming so good at something, it doesn't matter how nervous you are, your brain still works. And you can still hear things. So the programs will lack performance techniques like that. So stubborn ears, going to talk about that a little bit and why I'd recommend my courses if you feel stuck. Okay. So I'm really designing these courses for people that are stuck or for people who are willing to start over and rebuild their ear from scratch, because they're tailored specifically to how adults learn auditory skills, especially if your brain resists traditional drills. There's this balance of theory, practical application, and mindset coaching. All of that, I believe, is important, and that's just my technique. You might find that you hate the way I teach it, and that's fine. There's other programs out there that might work for you. But, if you're in any of these coaching tiers, like the Composing Our Inner Ear Training course, I'm there to coach you. You'll notice that here on YouTube, if somebody posts a comment, right now the channel's pretty small. And so I'm able to respond to everybody. And I will continue to do that as much as I can. If the channel grows, and I hope it does, because when it grows, I can just keep offering more stuff. But if it grows and it gets to the point where I can't possibly read every comment, one, I probably will try and read every comment because I want it. It helps me inform my decisions a little bit. But two, what I'll do is I'll kind of compile a list of questions, and when we do these live streams, I'll answer them. I've done that before. That's a good way of, kind of putting everything into one compartment so that I'm not just constantly responding to comments and not creating courses. So the Audiation course also, as I said, it pairs perfectly with a Flawless course, and this way you're not just recognizing sound, you're also internalizing it. So if you want something that's really designed for you, that respects your struggles and teaches you how to overcome these struggles, I think my courses are it. But you can always give them a try. Try a few lessons here on YouTube. See if you like it. That's one of the best ways to figure it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and link my courses below. You can start with a Flawless Ear Training course if you want to build some solid listening skills from the ground up. Then you can jump in the Audiation course to deepen your musical understanding and creativity if you get to that point. These courses aren't quick fixes, but with daily practice and a little bit of patience, you'll notice real progress in weeks. And if you're not sure, try this free lessons here on YouTube. Learn more about the way I operate. There's just so much information on here. I talk again and again and again about the principles. I'm giving away the principles for free because it's in the implementation that it actually matters. And for that, at least at this point in time, there's kind of a nominal fee associated with it. But, try it out, see if it works for you. And, if you found this helpful, it'd be nice if you hit the subscribe button. This just lets me know that you like this video. I use it a little differently. I don't really care too much about the algorithm. I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how that works. But when a lot of people like a video, or I see that there's a high retention, which means people are watching all the way through, then that tells me that there is interest in what I just talked about. So I'll talk more about it. If something doesn't get as much reaction, then I'm like, okay, well, maybe there's a more niche group for that, and maybe that's not what I'll focus on right now, because I'm trying to create videos that are helpful for everybody. And I was not able to see the chat today, so if anybody was commenting in the chat, I'm not ignoring you. I'm going to go in and I'm probably going to respond to those comments now. So you can kind of leave the chat window open and you'll have a few minutes here to type something if you want to. But yeah, it's new setup. I'm here in Washington now, and I have kind of a different organization. So until I get everything up where I can actually see your comments again, I just don't know what or if you're saying anything. So I hope this was helpful today. Please let me know if you have any questions or if there's something you'd like to see in a future session here. And we're going to do this on Wednesdays. I'm going to try and start at 1 p.m. Sometimes it'll be 2. So it'll be in that range, but it'll always be on here on Wednesdays. That's kind of the goal. So thank you, and I hope this is helpful, and I'll see you next time.